COVID has thrown the whole work world into a spin. Thousands lost their jobs due to the dramatic business contraction. Those still employed face unprecedented challenges and even threats to their tenure. The worry is whether this is a longer-term trend and how to respond to these changes in the job market. In this third monthly edition of the Caribbean Economic Forum, we look at the future of work and the challenges of maintaining a viable workforce. Our international panel includes Dr. Carmen Pages-Serra, Chief Labor Markets Division of the Inter-American Development Bank, Chen, the President of the Caribbean Employers Confederation, and Dr. Rochelle Haynes, International Human Resource Management Specialist and GigHR expert. We welcome our distinguished guest and worldwide audience to the Caribbean Economic Forum August 2020 edition on television, radio, and online.
So happy you could join us. I'm in Kingston, Jamaica, and my guests are all over the place. It is here in Kingston as well. Of course, we've got Carmen sitting down in Washington, D.C., and Rochelle is in the UK, outside of London. So wherever you could join us, wherever you are, on television or radio, line particularly as well. So this is a subject that really is the very heart of everything that's happening around, because if you don't have a job, you don't have money, you don't have prospect of growing and developing. That is really the center of our discussion this evening. So I want to start with the employer point of view about whether you have a job or not. And Chen represents the Employers Confederation of the whole Caribbean region. So Wayne, let's start with you first. Give us an overview. Let's keep here because I want to use in very. So Wayne, update us the status across the region that your partners are in.
Well, the Caribbean, it is well known, is the most tourism-dependent region in the world. So, you know, some of our countries have really taken a very big hit. If you look to the north, you'll see countries like Antigua and Barbuda, St. Kitts Nevis, countries like Jamaica, the Bahamas, that are heavily tourism-dependent. Barbados, heavily tourism-dependent. So you can imagine that the complete stoppage of cruise shipping and the cancellation, the closure of hotels has had a tremendous employment and economic impact on the region. Some countries are less affected. Trinidad, Guyana, Belize are less affected. But the pandemic has had, we hope, a once-in-a-lifetime negative impact on jobs and our economies. So using Jamaica as an example, where about 30% of the jobs are tourism dependent, you can imagine that the direct impact has been on hundreds of thousands of our workers. It's not something that we think about a lot, but even when hotels are closed, expenses continue. There are mortgages to pay, security costs, the costs of maintenance. So many businesses directly involved in the industry and linked downstream to the industry are racking up bills with zero or very little cash flow. So the impact has been deep and tremendous. At the beginning of the pandemic.
So in essence, we have you zeroed in on one of the most critical areas that employs so many thousands of people across the region, and for which we really don't have an answer to in real terms, because we'll talk a little later on about whether we have an opportunity to diversify. But you talk about tourism, but what about other sectors across this region? What are you hearing?
You know, of course, that even though tourism might be, the hotels and the restaurants and the attractions are in the front line, it has impacted agriculture, it has impacted distribution, it has impacted some light manufacturing. So the other sectors are also impacted. The slowdown or almost dead stop in terms of air travel has had another impact. remittances from relatives in North America and the UK, which are also a significant economic contributor in the region, had slowed initially but are gradually picking back up. I don't think any sector has escaped the effect of the pandemic. Some, I suspect, will start to show up even more markedly. People who have mortgages to pay, I suspect you're going to see an uptick in defaults in loans and mortgages as time goes on. So the financial sector will also be heavily affected, we predict. Julian, frankly, it's hard to see, even with the preliminary look, any sector in the region being unaffected.
Okay, so you've laid it out for us as is. I mean, it's not a pretty story, and certainly not a happy one for people. Far from. All right. So let me bring Rochelle in here. She's in England, but of course she's a Caribbean person. She's been there for more than a decade now, but still keeping tabs on the region. What contacts are feeling from the region, Rochelle?
I'm seeing a mixture, a lot of nervousness, I would say is the best way to put it, or fear. There are a lot of companies that are being slashed within the Caribbean context, not just, a lot of people have been speaking about workforces being depleted, but in some cases whole companies are falling under. And it kind of mirrors what is happening within the UK context as well, where we have more than 33% of the workforce being made redundant, and 33% of companies expecting to make more redundancies within the next month. There has been some modest growth since the lockdown has begun to reopen. So as a result, we are seeing some level of positivity, although it's very modest, and it's going to be very doubtful that it will return to the pre-pandemic sort of peaks that we would have seen. Within the Caribbean context, I agree with Wayne. There's a lot of uncertainty at the minute and a lot of nervousness and fear as every single sector across the region is being affected, whether directly or indirectly. So that will unfortunately continue in this time of uncertainty, but we're hoping to also see some silver linings coming out of that as well.
All right, so you're optimistic there, Rochelle. Let's bring Carmen in here because she's been studying the whole matter of the labor markets in Latin America and the Caribbean. Carmen, this is a very critical time for us. I mean, there was a point at which we felt like we were really coming out and making the prospects don't look very good. Am I correct?
Well, I think you're correct, unfortunately. First of all, let me thank you for being here and say hello to everyone in the Caribbean. What we're seeing everywhere, really, across the region is a lot of jobs have been lost. A lot of companies have basically are either have no income or have had to close. So the situation is quite terrible, and I think it calls for major policy efforts to try to recover jobs as soon as possible. So first, to contain the pandemic. That's essential, because even if we open up, if the pandemic is still there, economic activity does not continue. So we have to first contain the pandemic, and second, we have to put a lot of effort in job recovery. And that means solving a lot of problems that the companies have right now. I mean, working capital has to be provided somehow, and incentives for job creation have to be also provided, so companies can go a little bit beyond what they would do otherwise and start calling back workers and creating jobs. Of course, some sectors are going to have a hard time because we are not expecting probably tourists in a long time. So we'll have to think long and hard what to do with those sectors. Perhaps one solution is to take workers from the tourism sector and reallocate them to other sectors that are doing better, at least temporarily, while this sector comes back. And this is something we've been studying in other countries, and it's possible because workers in the tourism sector share a lot of skills with other industries, and so they could be reallocated to other industries. And this is something the countries could work on.
All right, so you've already started to give us some kind of solution here. And which brings me to Wayne, because really, when you hear about taking people out of one particular job and putting them into another, we've been talking about diversification for a very long time. I mean, how realistic is it now? Are we forced into recognizing that we have to do something, Wayne?
Well, you know, one of the big things that we have had to change over the years is mindsets. In fact, mindsets are perhaps the hardest thing to change. And one thing I want to quote Rahm Emanuel, who says, this, you know, paraphrase him to say that this crisis is too good to waste. It has forced us to accept that economic diversification is necessary. It has forced us to understand that the digital transformation of our economies and societies is urgently needed. And I know that we're all home and focused and socially distancing. I think we need to really pull together and accelerate some of the changes that we have talked about for a very long time. We can't pick up tourism workers and just slot them into other sectors so easily. We have to look at the challenge and we have to look at the opportunity. One of the opportunities, the growth areas in the region has been business process outsourcing, now newly redubbed as global services. There are opportunities, there are challenges in the sector, but it's a sector that offers the greatest opportunity for employing thousands of people in a relatively short space of time. But we have to understand what the opportunities are and understand that there are training requirements, there are attitudinal change requirements, there is the threat of artificial intelligence taking some of those jobs very quickly. So it needs national dialogue, it needs social dialogue to really look at the opportunities in sectors that we can ramp up employment very quickly in. Carmen's point is very well taken. Businesses will need some oxygen to survive. Businesses are going to go under without some sort of state intervention, whether in working capital, whether in some sort of mortgage breaks, whether incentives to hire. So there are many things that have to happen simultaneously if we are going to come out of this pandemic with jobs intact or jobs increasing.
Dwayne, I'm gonna stay with you because I really want to get a sense of the kind of experiences the business sector has had across this region. You talk about government's intervention. A number of governments have provided stimulus packages, etc., for businesses, particularly the small to medium, etc. What do you think is required? Do you suspect that government is going to have to put far more money into these packages?
I suspect so. I know packages were devised, different sorts of packages, especially targeting small and medium enterprises where the vast majority of our jobs are. I believe that at the outset of the crisis, and we're talking around March or so, I don't think many governments anticipated that we'll be going back into lockdown now in August. So it is something that will have to be quickly again revisited, perhaps refined given the first wave of experiences. But keeping businesses alive, it has to be the first order of the first priority. Keeping jobs going has to be a top priority. And this is not to sacrifice public safety. Balancing, as they say, lives and livelihoods has to be something that every government in the region will now have to figure out. Local circumstances are different here and there. The early indicators in many instances, going back to Rochelle's point about uncertainty, are not heartening. When you consider that Trinidad and Tobago, for argument's sake, does not have a high level of tourism as, say, Barbados. Trinidad closed down, effectively closed down 5 months ago, and yet still cases are coming in at a more rapid pitch than they were back in March or April. So no, I don't think any government has really unlocked the secret as to how to halt the pandemic completely. 1 or 2 countries have gotten off, but by and large, we are still trying to figure it out as we go along. So keeping business alive while we ensure that we don't have an outbreak, a level of new cases that overwhelm our public healthcare is critical. But some sort of welfare for business, especially small and medium enterprises where the vast majority of jobs are, has to be part of the program.
Okay, which then gives me a good intro to Rochelle again, because we've known the UK government has responded to the business needs and provided the stimulus packages, et cetera, similar to what has been done here, for instance, in Jamaica. But it is showing that they now have to face an increased debt load and the possibility that they may have to inject even more money into the private sector.
Yeah, it's definitely an axe. A bone of contention here at the minute, because by the end of this month, the official stimulus package scheme will end. So that package has been a furlough scheme, which where organizations are paying their employees, 80% of their salary while they've been laid off. And that's going to end August 31st, and that's where the real uncertainty begins. So with the opening of the economy and that initial growth that's being seen, there's some optimism there, but at the same time, there's a lot of tension and still uncertainty and no straight answers in that area, because now organizations are wrangling with having to cut their staff permanently, which no one wants to do. But the alternatives to that aren't entirely clear. So the government has been speaking about injecting more money, but where that money is going to continually come from if this situation prolongs is the golden question, really.
So the governments have a challenge, the private sector has a challenge, but we have, of course, the benefit of research, which I don't know what plays in any of these cities. This is a new situation. Carmen, we need some answers here. What should be the priority?
Well, I think the priority, as I said, we need to distinguish the very short run, the very short term, where we need to come out of this. We need to make sure that the pandemic is contained, as I said. And then we also need to provide relief for companies and for workers, so income support, relief for companies. This is to keep us alive in all senses, not even, economically and health-wise. But then we start to think also that we cannot go back to where we were. This is an opportunity. This is an opportunity that we cannot waste, as has been already mentioned. In looking ahead, we can reshape the way we do things and move toward a better future. And that means, for example, taking advantage of technology. Technology has been changing quietly the labor market now for some years. And, we were looking at it, all countries were looking at it, but everybody was thinking, well, we can do this tomorrow. It turns out that we now have a situation where what we were saying was the future work has become the present of work. All now working well. We are not all. I guess the lucky ones that can do it are working remotely with having to face a new whole suite of technologies that many of us don't know how to use yet. We have, therefore, a new demand for skills that we have to meet. So as we think about the future, we have to say, okay, what are the new skills that we'll need now, immediately after, and in the future, and can take us a better place and can help us to pay for this bill that's coming now. Because unless we grow faster and stronger in the future, we won't be able to pay the bill now. So if we don't do it well now and we just pretend that nothing is happening, then we won't be able to pay this bill. So we have to make sure that we implement the changes that take us to a better future. And I think that's exactly the priority, with the containment, of course.
All right. So, Carmen, thank you very much for bringing us to that point. We did have a little bit of technical problems there, and we missed a bit of your comment, but I think in essence we got a good sense of where we are. I think, though, that what we have now to do really is to look at exactly the next steps, particularly. And I suspect what I want to talk about particularly is what's really happened in this country. Because what really, a number of things have happened. I think Wayne talked about the fact that resistance to change really got swept away by COVID's impact on us. And for a lot of people who really hesitated about allowing their people to work remotely, work from home, etc., that has certainly gone by the wayside. And now there are so many people that they wouldn't even bring certain workers back in. Chen, what's been the picture on your side?
There's an opportunity, but there's also the reality is that there's still a lot of resistance to change. A couple of months ago, when the Jamaican government lifted the restrictions and people were allowed to get back to the office, I got a call the Monday morning from a worker in a fairly large organization saying that 40 workers were now bunched back up in an office with no social distancing. So I said, what happened to what was happening before? She said, before, many of us were working from home. They had staggered the shifts. We were working, and they had figured it out. So I was a little concerned. So I called the head of the organization to find out why would we have had a setup that was working quite well before. It was all new, but they were getting it working out through the difficulties. A lot of the workers were women. They were allowed to stay home now because the kids were home from school and so on and so forth. So he said he was a little surprised too. So he made a couple of calls to find out why would they have changed back, reverted to the old way of working when the new way had been working so well. It turned out that the head of the department was not confident that those folks who were working from home were actually working. So my response was a simple one. Yeah. We had 3 months to figure it out, how to measure the output. Why didn't we use those 3 months sabbatical when something was working to put in place systems to ensure that there were measurable outputs that were being done from home? But many of our managers, I have to be blunt, understand management as control. They want to be in control, and they figure that if they are not seeing workers at desks working, that work is not being done. Unfortunately, there are other managers who are who have seen the opportunities of remote work. And the questions now being asked are, if somebody's working at home and slips and falls in the kitchen, is that a workplace accident? So for the more evolved managers and business operators in the region, the discussion has moved forward to how do we now formalize remote work and make it a part of the landscape. So we have some more work to do on mindsets.
Okay, Rochelle is the human resource expert here. Remote working, what's the experience in London or in England for that matter, in the UK?
I think some of the mindsets that Wayne mentioned, they're not unique to the Caribbean at all. Even within the London context, it's been the same. So for example, I presented last year, June, at a conference, The Future of Work is Now, that was the name of the conference. And we mentioned the culture of digital nomadism, so persons traveling to remote work and how organizations can facilitate this. And the number one question we got from the conference is, how can you actually expect that to work? We can't see our workers, so we don't know that they're working. And it was the same in September as well. I presented in the Barbadian context, and the same question came up. How can we know that our workers are working if we can't see them? And always the question or the comment I pose to that is, if you have to question whether or not you can trust your employees if you can't see them, then there's something wrong with the organizational culture. So it's definitely an organizational mindset, because what raises the issue of trust is usually underlying issues within the organization that would cause you to question whether or not you can trust your employee. So whereas some companies are saying, how can you trust your employees to work when you can't see them? Other companies are saying, well, why would you not? So it's really to get to those underlying issues and then start to talk about that transformation process that would allow and facilitate remote working. So the digital transformation has to go hand in hand with the human mindset and the human transformation as well.
So what do you, I mean, if you had to advise any of the companies now in terms of resolving some of those fears and reservations?
Mm-hmm. I would say invest in good digital tools. So that's a starting point for those managers who may be nervous and may be new to this. And if you're having those fears and reservations about whether your employees are working, for whatever reasons those may be, those reasons can't be fixed overnight. So a good starting point would be to invest in digital tools. For example, we're familiar with Monday.com, we're familiar with Trello and Slack. Those tools that allow not just for productivity monitoring, but also allows for online engagement with your employees. You can speak to them, you can see updates, they can post their documents, teams can interact on a daily basis. So that provides some measure of comfort while you start to think about how can you transform the organization on a more holistic basis. So I would say it's a mixture of incorporating and creating that digital ecosystem within the company in terms of the tools and protocols, but also work on your more long-term strategy. And another thing that has to go hand in hand with that is also how do you boost individuals, both employees and employers' confidence that what is happening digitally is secure and protected, because there's a lot of fears around the sharing of information. There's a lot of fears around cybersecurity and so forth. And many companies or countries that have had that fears, they've invested in cyber defense protocols and mechanisms that would help to allay some of those fears. So it's a wider change, but at the smaller individual let's act now level, you can start to look at investing in reliable digital tools.
And should they expect the company to pay for those tools that they use at home?
The company should be willing to, but at the same time, there are a lot of tools that are free. So for example, I use Trello for free within my organization and also for my consulting, because I lecture at the University of Western England. We use more Teams there, we use Collaborate. But in the consulting sphere, I largely use Trello to work with different teams across the globe. And a lot of these tools are free. Where you're talking about the licensing and the widespread use of those tools, then the company should be willing to pay for that. And in many cases where you're signing on or, where you're signing on or acquiring these things as a company, there are usually subsidies associated with that companies can take advantage of. So I would say it is the responsibility of the company to ensure that the individual can effectively work from home. And that also comes hand in hand with public sector support as well.
All right. So we've got the tools in hand, but there's another question which I'll put to Carmen. This has to do with productivity. I know of one instance where a worker was far more productive working remotely than she was working in the office. And that raises the concern that a lot of managers have about overall productivity. Will they get the same out of the worker as they work remotely? Is that a fair concern, Carmen?
Well, it might be. I think it's a matter of, as Rochelle has said, is the culture that's very important. I mean, I was thinking now I'm a researcher, but also I am a manager. I have 45 people working in my team. And the way we deal with this, and we dealt before the COVID, was we discuss results. So I meet with my team regularly and we discuss, okay, so what are you working on? What are the deadlines? Where should we expect this? Let's negotiate a date that makes sense. And now I expect that. So I don't care if you're working on this project at home, in the beach, in Barbados, making maybe taking advantage of the welcome stamp. You know, the matter is that it gets done, and it gets done at the level of expectation of quality that we have discussed ex ante. So in a way, I think it's that we need to shift from a culture and organizations that measure inputs. So I can measure that you're sitting there in a chair, But you know, with internet and everything, particularly for knowledge workers, it could look like they're working, but they're actually, you know, searching the internet or doing something else, wasting their time. So I think we need to move from a culture of measuring inputs to a culture of measuring results. And ex ante being able to define what results we, what success looks like, what high productivity looks like, and then be able to come back and see whether this person and this organization have met those goals or not. And that, I think, changes completely the mindset. It doesn't really matter now what you do things. The important thing is that you do it. And if as a manager, I see that, for example, my employees are working better at home because they waste less time, they can take care of children. There are many things that people now, you know, we have lives, we have families, stuff have to take care of. If they're more efficient that way, why should I be worried? Let them do what's best, as long as we all know what success looks like and what the expectation is. So that would be, and I think that's the way many, I would say, more modern organizations are working. And therefore, when COVID came and telework happened, the shift was not that big. It just was a matter of where are you sitting now, but not the way we work.
But Wayne, as you listen to both Rochelle and Carmen, obviously your membership will have to have a rethink, a rework, a reorganization, etc., of their companies to respond to this new reality. Am I correct here?
Yes, there are challenges, but there are also opportunities. You'd have seen that, just use one instance, the fast food industry moved to more, when people couldn't come and sit in restaurants, many of the fast food outlets, the drive-through service, the curbside pickup, things of that nature. You'd have noticed a lot of shopping went online. So countries that, you know, people were used to Amazon, but suddenly a lot of local online retailers sprang up, or a lot of brick and mortar retailers transitioned to online. So the pandemic has forced, it has had casualties, but it has also made a lot of smart people jump in and find new opportunities. So we just have to keep pushing that process. I think the fundamental thing, as Carmen touched on, we have to stop focusing on inputs and start focusing on outputs. Organizations have to find ways to measure outputs and to understand that wasting an hour in traffic in the morning and wasting an hour in traffic in the evening is a negotiation you may well have with a worker to say, look, you can work from home. I know you're going to save 2 hours on the road, but this is how we're going to do it. So it needs a new conversation with many, many workers. And you'll be surprised that having that conversation and people now being home and understanding the value of family time and so on, it's not just an economic transformation that we are seeing. We are witnessing a social transformation. And I think both go hand in hand. And that discussion can take us to new places. And not just a new place to the side, but a new place better than where we were before. But it's going to require a bigger conversation. And I don't want to sound like it's a sort of airy-fairy, pie-in-the-sky sort of setup. We're seeing it actually happening in some organizations. And you always have the leaders in it. You're going to see some organizations, they're going to say, boy, this thing is tough, but let us find a way out. And some have already found a way out. As I say, I saw a story Rochelle might be familiar with, because it has a slight Jamaican connection, with John Lewis in the UK throwing away a 100-year-old slogan because they realized that 70% of their business is now online. A lot of retailers are going to have that aha moment and say, are we still in the business we were 3 months ago, 6 months ago? And if we're not, how do we now make the business that we are now in more efficient than it was before?
Okay.
There are going to be casualties, no doubt, but that is the creative destruction of capitalism and the market.
Okay. All right, we're going to continue our conversation after this break. This is the Caribbean Economic Forum. This is the August edition, looking at the future of work.
Solutions for common problems during this COVID situation. We fighting to protect our livelihood across the nation. This is for we to learn, share ideas and
centralbank.org.bb for more information.
The Jamaica Debates Commission presents the General Election Debates in association with Proven, Scotiabank, National Democratic Institute, NCB, PanJam, Digicel, Flow, JN Group, and Victoria Mutual Building Society. See the two major political parties debate national issues live August 25, 27, and 29 at 9 p.m. Don't miss the General Election Debates presented by the Jamaica Debates Commission. Watch, listen, decide, vote.
COVID-19 is still here. Always wear your mask correctly while in public places, covering your nose and mouth at all times. Masks should never be worn over the head, under your chin, below your nose, or hanging from your ears. Recovery from COVID-19 can take up to 60 days or more. The mask or the ventilator? You choose. A message from the Ministry of Health and Wellness.
On election day, all electors must wear a mask and have their hands sanitized. Electors must observe 6 feet physical distancing and remove your mask when instructed by the presiding officer so you may be identified. You will be issued a ballot along with a pencil and directed to the voting booth. Hand your ballot to the presiding officer and place your pencil in the box for used pencils. Sanitize your hand before dipping your finger in the electoral ink. This is a message from the Electoral Commission of Jamaica.
Welcome back to our Caribbean Economic Forum. I'm Julian Rogers in Kingston, Jamaica, and we're going to Bridgetown, Barbados now for the next contributor. Let's welcome Senator Toni Moore. She's the General Secretary of the Barbados Workers Union, which represents thousands of workers in that country. Good evening, Senator.
Good evening, Julian. Good evening, listeners.
All right. So, Senator, we've spoken a lot about the employers. We've talked to a human resources expert, and we've had a researcher in labor matters, etc. You're right in the middle of a particular most challenging times there in Barbados and for the Caribbean, for that matter. Now, these are times where there's a lot of uncertainty as far as the employees are concerned. I want to get a sense from you, first of all, about that uncertainty.
Well, you're correct. Workers in Barbados are highly uncertain at this time, especially as many have been in layoff situations. And as we speak, that layoff period is coming to an end because in Barbados, there's Social Security and unemployment benefit, and that unemployment benefit is 26 weeks. So as Rochelle was saying, their arrangement is furlough, ours is unemployment benefit. And the natural question for many is what happens after this 26 weeks? Certainly, there's also a provision that we have that you can trigger severance payment. But even if a worker triggers severance payment and receives that payment as a lump sum, then the bigger question is what next? What next when there is no alternative employment available? I was interested to hear Carmen speaking about the options available. For instance, you can take workers from tourism and put them in other areas. But the question would be, where are these areas? There is anticipation, or certainly we had anticipation that there will be construction, maybe helping the economy. We have not been able to get that up and running. And certainly a number of linkage industries to tourism have been complaining that they're experiencing downturn. So there's uncertainty for employers, and therefore there's uncertainty for workers, tremendous uncertainty.
You talk about the lack of an alternatives, so to speak, and particularly the suggestion made by Carmen and so on. But when Chen has been talking about the experience here in Jamaica, for instance, where the opportunities are opening up for more BPO operations, is that something that is the offering in terms of Barbados' recovery? Do you know about that?
Well, we are talking about opportunities, but in terms of actually being able to connect with the opportunities that there are, I think there's a gap. because right now a lot seems theoretical, and as frustration mounts and concepts just seem to be put out there, but the ability to see these translated into firm action for workers is limited. It is causing some amount of concern. It is difficult as a workers representative, therefore, to be able to understand something intuitively and be able to convey that to the worker out there who is in an uncertain situation, either the layoff that I spoke about, or who has been experiencing shorter working hours, or who has been experiencing a reduced wage on account of salary cuts and so on. It's very difficult to convey to that worker the kinds of opportunities that Mr. Chen spoke about.
But I mean, the position you're in right now gives you an opportunity to look down the road. And what do you see beyond this uncertainty? Is there any so-called light down the tunnel as far as you're concerned?
I think it's how we approach it. I do see light down the tunnel, but I am looking through that tunnel and ushering workers through that tunnel very cautiously. And why do I say so? It's because opportunities exist as long as systems and players are open to the changes that I heard panelists speak about. Because we spoke about change in mindset, and unfortunately, I must make this plug that when we speak about changes in mindset, oftentimes there is a view that it is the worker that must change his or her mindset of the type of work that will be available to him or her, or the skills that they will need to trade in. But I think that we also need a shift in mindset in terms of how we view decency in the workplace. I think that and why I say so is because even in this COVID-19 period, we have experienced a hastening of some employers to posit a view that there should be some kind of force majeure because COVID-19 has not been occasioned by them. That is true, but it hasn't been occasioned by a worker either. So the question is, how do we try to balance sustainability with ensuring that everybody, including workers, also can have rights in the workplace? So yes, I'm seeing down that tunnel. We are having job task forces and job investments councils, and we are trying to put systems in place for future jobs and trying to train people. We have a national training initiative going. But if we have all these things and the mindsets don't change, then I am still saying that we need to tread cautiously.
Okay, Tony, Senator, let me give Carmen an opportunity to respond because you responded to some of the things she said earlier. Carmen, would you weigh in here, please?
Well, I agree that the first thing that we need to know is whether there are sectors that are growing faster than, let's say, the rest, and where these are the sectors of opportunity. In many countries, this has been actually the health sector, which has been overwhelmed, and it needs reinforcement to be able to fight the pandemic. And so you need a lot of people in the care industries, in the care occupations, not industries, people in all sorts of support jobs in the health industry. So that's one. But also logistics, everything that's related to delivery has had a huge increase because now everybody's buying online and everything is getting delivered to places. So that's number two. Then everything related to remote work, global services is supposed to also have an opportunity in this crisis. So we need to identify those sectors that actually need extra work. And that's urgent because we need to make sure those sectors can grow, and at the same time, we need to make sure that some workers can take their jobs. I'm not saying there's going to be jobs for everybody. I think the income support part is going to be still needed, and that's why it's so important that together as a society we can pick these bills and share them among all of us, because nobody's guilty of this. This is something that came upon us. But at the same time, all those who could work productively in existing or new jobs need to be also supported, because the country needs those people. The more people work, the easier it's going to be to pay that bill. And then, for example, we see a lot of opportunity in those transitions. We need to look at that for the specific with more detail. But for example, we've been able to transition people that are managers in hotels to manage some processes in the health industry, because a lot of the health industry has to do with actually empathy, with dealing with people. It's a service occupation, and a lot of the skills of dealing with clients, with service, with dealing with people actually are very developed in the tourism in the tourist sector occupations. So there is ways to do it, but the first thing we need to identify is where are those opportunities, which sectors are actually scrambling for more workers, because there are many that need more, that have increased their production during this pandemic. I'm sorry.
I think there's a good point for me to get Wayne Chen in to react to some of the comments made by the senator. Wayne Chen, Barbados has this excellent reputation in terms of a tripartite operation where the government, the trade unions, and of course the private sector are working together. Have you heard anything from Senator Tony Moore that gives you hope?
Barbados has had the longest standing formal social contract of any of the Caribbean countries, and it yielded very positive results for Barbados for a very long time. In the last go round, I think, you tell my friends in Barbados, everybody was perhaps a bit too polite to each other when and the crisis wasn't addressed. The crisis of uncompetitiveness wasn't addressed as quickly and assiduously as it should. But we're happy to know that Barbados is again leading in many ways in terms of innovation, in terms of thinking. I hear Senator Moore loud and clear. The fact is that the crisis we have right now is unprecedented, and no one sector is going to bring us out. It's going to require a tripartite approach, which the senator is very familiar with. It's going to require a sort of social dialogue with some realistic sacrifices that everybody will have to make, because we're going to have to pull each other out of this crisis. The fact is that even the very nature of work was evolving before the crisis. It's going to accelerate trends that we had seen before. We're going to see more gig work. We see Generation Z, Generation Y aren't like a boomer like myself who was looking forward to entering the world of work in my mid-20s and retiring in my 60s, pretty much having worked for the same place or two places for the whole of my working career. The aspirations of our young people are different from the aspirations of their parents and their grandparents. So we have to align the very nature of work with the aspirations of our people and the reality of the time. In doing so, there is a pushback against contract work and short-term work, which is characteristic of global services, which would mean that the whole talk about the social safety net and who pays for it will have to come to the fore, because it again has to become a tripartite or an agreement or a social contract. The transition from where we are now, where there is huge job losses in the tourism and the linkage industries, and Senator, frankly, in Barbados and in many of our island economies, there are companies who are looking at the 6-month layoff period, but they have zero income. In fact, they have expenses and no income. An empty hotel has no income. many of the hotels are closed and empty restaurants. Has no income, and empty attraction has zero income. They have mortgages to pay. They have the security bills to pay. There's a, yes, the utility bills are down, but there's to turn the lights on. Eh? So it's not a question of wanting to permanently send home workers. It's just that there is no income. We don't have any precedent like this anytime else in the history of this region, not in our living memories. So there's going to have to be some support, whether it is
okay. Thank you, Wade. Before I let the senator go, just a parting shot. Senator Moore.
Yes, I agree with Mr. Chen. A lot of what he has said, that hotels, for instance, have no work. I mean, well, no income coming in, and the challenge will be there. So much will be left to discussion and openness by all regarding how we're going to balance the whole question of business survival and continuity with the survival of the individual worker. Because if that worker has no income, the question of who pays for their survival also comes into play. So we are experiencing a number of tensions, what we would call tensions in society, based on the competing priorities, and the juggling act certainly is on, and finding the right policy mix is therefore important. A number of recommendations have been offered, and I eagerly anticipate hearing from the panelists a bit more of how we are going to perform this balancing act with the competing priorities or tensions, as I refer to them, to achieve a fair future of work and a just transition, a rapid, just transition into the future.
Thank you very much, Senator, for joining us from the Barbados Workers Union, Senator Tony Moore. This is the Caribbean Economic Forum. We've got viewpoints coming from everywhere, including those of you who are following us online. So let's go now to one of your messages. And this one reads, many persons are adequately equipped to work. The question is, how many people are adequately equipped to work remotely? The pandemic, stay-at-home orders, and closure of physical schools reveal how many persons did not have personal computers or internet. And that certainly is a concern that has been raised by many workers I know right here in Jamaica, for instance. Rochelle, what's the picture?
I totally agree. What we tend to have within, I can use the Barbadian context as an example. One of the main challenges to remote work is internet access. And while we have internet access, well, as we know, it's been revealed that not everyone has internet access. But typically with regards to seeing Barbados as a place with very high internet access, that still tends to be concentrated in certain parts of the island, particularly densely populated tourist areas, as opposed to being island-wide. So there's a lot still to be done in that area to make internet island-wide, and also to encourage island-wide digital literacy. I know there were some initiatives in the past that tried to create or enable island-wide internet access. And we're still waiting to hear more of what were some of the challenges with regards to achieving that, because in the end, it did not come through. So I think that is a real priority at the minute, not just for individuals, not just for organizations, but also for governments to see how they can help to facilitate that process. So it's definitely a challenge, and it's one that needs to be addressed. With the opening up of society again and workers being allowed back into the office, that's helping in some way. But because of social distancing, not as many persons are allowed in as possible. you're seeing some ingenuity with regards to a lot of businesses reworking their spaces to become co-working spaces, so individuals can now come in, pay a small fee, and use the computers. For some people, that will still be a challenge with regards to the fee that they need to pay in order to set up. In some cases, you can just buy a coffee, but still with persons being unemployed, even that can be a stretch now. So there definitely needs to be more rethinking and more support in that area.
All right, let's turn our attention to feedback from our social media viewers and contributors. And this is where we bring in our social media anchor, who is Anki Scott Joseph. Anki, what are you hearing from the people who are watching the show?
Good evening, Julian. Good evening to everyone, and a special good evening to the panel. Thanks to you, remote working sounds like the business transformation that we all need. But the viewers are saying there are challenges. We cannot simply switch to remote working without addressing these challenges. There are 14 that have presented themselves on the live track tonight, and they are flexibility of work and how they impact on work culture, the increased freedom, which should bring happier workers, but have led them to increase their costs because they have to meet expenditures such as utility bills. The other has to do with what does the future of work mean for jobs and wages, in addition to academics, the uncertainty about what skills to study and what skills we should master, because no one wants to invest time and money to develop skills which would not be used in the future. Julian, the pandemic has given us one thing that we all always want more, which is time. As a result of this future of work and remote working, we see that persons now are able to complete tasks within a shorter space of time. So viewers are saying that the 9-to-5 workday is no longer necessary. Some organizations have realized this, and as a result, they have shortened the work week, but this has coincided with reduced wages. Workers wanted to be treated fairly. Therefore, it is very important for HR practitioners to work along with corporate leaders to develop emotional intelligence skills. And in addition to developing policies which would allow them to demonstrate high levels of empathetic leadership. With that said, Julia, there is the issue of labor and how would this impact on those coming into the labor market. There are a number of questions. The first question will go to Mr. Chen. Mr. Chen, for persons entering the labor market now, whether they are young people, the elderly, or women, they may have to do so at lower wages. Do our islands need to revisit the existing labor laws to ensure that this paradigm shift that we're leading towards does not create a new dimension of issues for income inequality that we're experiencing? The second question goes to Rochelle. Rochelle, the reality is the workforce spans at least 5 generations who have varying cognitive attitudes, ethics, and goals. How can organizations leverage the future of work model without having to reduce their business ethics values and their social values, and at the same time reap economic benefit? How can they reap the economic benefit and not violate their business ethics and their code of conduct? The final question goes to Rochelle as well. Rochelle, there's a challenge for those in the gig economy. For work is not a place, but an activity that takes place at a specific location for income. How can they leverage this new model? What advice can you offer to help them spark creativity and innovation? With that, Julian, I want to thank you. I give way to the panel to allow them to share their thoughts. Good evening.
Thank you very much, Anki. So let's go first to Win Chen. to respond to that question, which is posed really about this whole matter of inequality or quality as far as wages are concerned. Income.
I think that if all leaders had figured out how to legislate better wages, they would have kept raising wages over a period. We have agreed on minimum wages, but it shows you that there are limits to political diktat. The fact is that wages, you can't fight the laws of economics, and over time wages are linked to productivity, and productivity has to be matched to something that the market wants. So to have higher wages and sustainably higher wages would mean that individuals would have to figure out how to become more productive in services and goods that add value. The trend in the world is away from going to university, coming out with a degree, and having an expectation that a degree in this or a degree in that will automatically translate to higher wages. The fact is that there are certain professions, we touched for argument's sake earlier on healthcare. There are some, the trends are there. A registered nurse is going to earn at some point in her career the equivalent of $100,000 US per year. A doctor, somewhat more. There are some high demand professions, and there are professions that are not so high demand. The fact is that if I was to advise a young person now entering the job market, I would say, look at the basket of skills that are in demand. You have to understand the marketplace. There's no expectation anymore that having a tertiary education guarantees you a particular level of wages. The fact is that there are some areas that there is an oversupply, and there are other areas that there is a shortage. There are skills that are short that are still commanding top dollar. In Jamaica, when the pandemic started, I'll just give you an instance, there was a lot of talk around intensive care units and beds. I don't think the public was quite understanding that the discussion was not around a physical bed. It was around the personnel that could provide a level of care in an intensive care unit. And that means particularly experienced intensive care nurses. Jamaica has a shortage because as soon as nurses reach a particular level of experience to be proficient in intensive care, they are recruited away to the rich countries, offered huge salaries, offers to relocate their entire families. We can, it's not a question of just training more ICU nurses. We will train more, but those with experience take years to develop. So there is a demand, there are skills in high demand, and I'm using that as one extreme of the market. Then you have a lot of kids coming out.
We gotta take a quick break here and come back and continue our conversation. This is the Caribbean Economic Forum. The future of work will be continued after this.
The point of wearing a mask is to prevent the spread of air droplets from persons who may or may not be infected. When wearing a mask, please ensure that the mask goes above the nose and below the chin. This might be a bit uncomfortable, but it's for your own safety. The position of the mask is very important. It should not be worn on your forehead, under your chin, or on your neck. Please do not remove the mask when speaking. This actually causes more droplets to be released into the atmosphere. Trust me, if you have on a mask, we will still hear you. When you're removing a mask, try not to touch the front of the mask. If you do, remember to wash your hands or use hand sanitizer. Please throw away the mask appropriately. Remember, partial protection is better than no protection.
Elections in Jamaica are now monitored under the campaign financing legislation. Therefore, I implore all candidates, political parties and contributors to adhere to the requirements.
Candidates in an election may spend up to $15 million and registered political parties up to $630 million. Candidates Political parties and contributors who fail to disclose are guilty of an offense and liable to charges and/or a term of imprisonment.
The transparency and effectiveness of our democratic process requires you to be informed and involved.
A message from the Electoral Commission of Jamaica.
We're going digital. The times are changing, and we have to change too. As more and more banks cease to encash checks and move towards digital payments, PATH is examining alternative payment options. We are working with banks and other service providers to find ways to pay your PATH benefits without checks. You might be asked to open a bank account or to select a payment agency. So, get ready and stay informed. For more information, call PATH at 876-922-8007 or check the Ministry's website and Facebook page. PATH, advancing your family, developing Jamaica. A message from the Ministry of Labor and Social Security.
And welcome back to our special discussion here on the future of work. We had a couple of questions posed by our online viewers because they came up on the social media, thanks to Anki. And there were two questions for Rochelle. One of them had to do with the matter of the value of work, and the other, gig economy. In fact, it gives Rochelle an opportunity to explain what gig is all about, and that is not a fact.
Thank you, Julian. And thank you to our viewers for listening and also for the questions. If you see me looking down, it was because I was ferociously scribbling the question so I could reply. With regards to the gig economy, what we're talking about is platforms that allow workers to interface with either clients directly or indirectly through the employer's platform or network. So for example, you may have, you're very familiar with Uber, where you may have an employer provides a platform where workers can engage in sign up online. They never have any physical contact with the actual employer themselves, and they might be working, let's say, Uber is a US company, they sign up from Brazil, or they sign up from some part of Europe, and they're interacting and hired by the platform through that site. Or you have the other side of gig economy work, whereas you have persons directly offering their skills through various platforms as well. So in any case, those platforms are employers, but in some cases, the workers operate at one different levels, whether highly skilled or low skilled, let's say, but also with regards to the way in which they provide their work and how they interact with the customer helps to determine that. Sometimes the customer might never actually have any physical interaction with the worker. So think about if you have a logo designed online, you go through a platform that helps you to generate a logo, but you're not actually interfacing with the person that's helping you to create that logo. So that's one form, as opposed to, let's say, the Uber option where you are hired by the company, or you get the job or the gig by the company, that's where we get the name gig from, and you directly interact with the customer. So those are ways that you can work on within the gig economy platform. And with that type of work, it does present a lot of opportunities for persons within the labor market, and that we've seen a graph vast growth in the uptake of those platforms because of, one, the flexibility and freedom that they present, but also the ability for persons to offer their skills online or even build their businesses or build out their businesses through these sites as well. In some cases as well, you have, especially with regards to more highly skilled labor, where we're talking about digital working in general, you have those persons directly reaching out to the companies and working remotely to deliver on the service. So that's what we're talking about when we're talking about gig economy and gig work. With regards to the questions that were given, the first question around how do organizations, well, actually, I'll talk about the skills first because, and Keith, thank you for sharing and thank you for putting it so succinctly. That was quite a lot to wrap up in one go. So with regards to the skills, persons were asking about what skills you can learn at university and otherwise to be relevant for the future. I have a mixture of hard and soft skills here. So I'll talk about the hard skills first. Some of them I have with regards, a lot of them are related to digital skills. Familiar with data. And Keith, earlier this week, was brilliant. Said data is as important as hand sanitizer, and you're exactly correct. There, data is a premium, as big a premium as knowledge. Well, the two are linked. But analytics or anything around learning how to read data is particularly crucial, whereas organizations are very interested now in reading the trends of customer feedback, reading the temperature with regards to employees or the organization. Big thing with the products and services. That's quite important. Coding is one in regards to being able to create, let's say, apps or online or digital products that help a customer deliver our client to help what they want to. Learning are big. With regards outside of the digital skills, I would say what's very, especially within the gig economy, is skills and brand in regards to those skills. One of the things, if you want to work in a flexible way for your own business, it's very important to know how to sell and to sell online. Communicate with the customer effectively and how to position yourself in a way that, well, to stand out, but also you want to appeal to the market. The hard skills, some examples. I'm going to go to these skills now just because those hard skills I label with caution. And why I label them with caution is because the world is changing so rapidly. And while we're saying that these skills are important to know now, you don't know, well, 2020 has shown us that we don't know what's going to happen from day to day. So we don't know what's, with regards to the future and changes, what will become priorities. These are definitely what has been shown as indicative moving forward. With regards to those soft skills, in mind, the biggest thing you can do for yourself when it comes to preparing for the new, we say the new work, is to develop continuous learning. So when global business changes, you can easily pivot, or you are not necessarily, well, it's hard to say that you won't necessarily be caught off guard when you have pandemics, you have natural disasters and so forth. But with regards to reading the business environment, if you have a continuously learning mindset where you're constantly seeking out knowledge, where you're constantly staying abreast of the situations that are going on, but you also are looking and reflecting at the way in which you acquire knowledge and the way in which you interpret and synthesize knowledge, that's going to be one of your greatest assets. Some of the panelists mentioned before with regards to emotional intelligence, that cannot be said enough. Knowing how to interact with your colleagues in an effective way, knowing how to be, especially with regards to leadership, knowing how to be flexible when you need to with your workforce, knowing how to be and to respond in a way that you will get out of your workforce. And equally on the worker side, knowing how exactly to interact with your team members and be as effective as possible. Agile leadership, so which type of leadership is suitable within which context, because one type of leadership will not work across all contexts. So knowing how to adjust your leadership style according to, for example, different cultures is a big one. Also, not just national cultures, but also different organizational cultures, or sometimes even different individual personalities. Agile leadership is a big one. Resilience. We cannot underscore resilience and problem solving within this context. Again, we've seen what's going on globally. We know we can't necessarily predict everything that's going to happen from day to day, but what you can help to manage is your response to situations. I'll give you an example of within the UK context, one of the issues that we typically have with a lot of graduates leaving schools and going into organizations. I had a presentation with one of my placement students, and I sat in on her presentation in this large council. And the biggest complaint they had about their Gen Z employees that were, let's say the younger graduates that were coming in, was that they needed too much support. They said with regards to they were not able to make presentations, they didn't feel confident enough, they didn't want to speak on the phone. In some cases, parents were calling the organizations to check in on their graduates, 21 and above. They had their lunch thing. So with regards to actually knowing how to be resilient and independent within the environment that you operate in, and making sure that you build yourself up in the skills that you need, that's particularly important. But we know that the school curriculum from an early age coming right through plays a big role in developing those skills as well. So that's my view in terms of skills. Julian, I don't know how much time I have, so I'll just wait for you to interrupt me.
Fair enough. But I really want you to finish this because it's very important advice you're giving to people about the future possibilities.
Okay. So with regards to, we mentioned resilience. With regards to problem solving, that's another big one. If you want to be constantly relevant within the organizational context, then you have to be the person that's coming to your employer or coming to your customer or client with solutions, not with problems. Be the person to be able to present. So with a lot of training and a lot of mindset working and being to listen, to ignore. So I would say soft skills, major ones. The question was managing a multi-workforce, something that we tackled a lot in consultancy. Last year we created a model called GigHR, where basically it's a model for managing a blended workforce. And what you mentioned there, what Anki described in the questions, was exactly that. You have a multi-generational workforce where you have different generations, Gen X, Gen Y, Gen Z, so forth. You also have part-time workers, full-time workers, and that you have online workers or external state, not full with the company. AI technology workforce alongside what is increasingly being seen across a lot of regions, particularly within the Asian region, of people working alongside new technologies, automated technologies, and other, well, in some cases, robots, literally robots. So knowing how to manage that is important. So what we said within this framework is a matter of creating new rules. We call them gig rules, tools, skills, and thrills. And when we spoke about those rules, those were really about new protocols that need to be instilled within the organization. So someone mentioned with regard to key questions, how organizations learn the future of work model without reducing business or challenging values. With regards to challenging social values, opposite organization, we need to change the current organization ethics. In all cases, what is held within organizations now is not necessarily what's best for the current workforce that's been developing and changing and evolving. So we mentioned with regards to idea control and knowing whether or not it's working, those things need to be challenged. So one of the things we said under rules was looking at those new protocols, developing a future of work strategy within the organization, and also thinking about the way in which work is executed. But on top of that, the general work environment, looking around your office, looking around even within the digital sphere and seeing if you've actually created the right environment and atmosphere. And with regards to tools, we were talking about creating that digital ecosystem. So you want to create, your Senator Tony Moore mentioned before she left with regards to a lot of the concerns with embracing a digital economy. We're in organizations, you embrace those digital tools, you also have to have the digital infrastructures and due diligence that will help to protect you. Looking at things like cybersecurity, data within the organization. And speaking with regards to the need to constantly skill and build that continuous learning environment. But also where we talk about thrills, we're talking about how do you make sure that everyone within your work environment from various generations included age. So in your current for includes having a team that may have a person that's part-time, a person that's full, a person that's not covered by the company. How do you do that? Make sure that, say, an entrepreneur working with the their company are aligned with your organization's company goals. When you're working with that team, you don't have those sort of tensions or conflicts between those goals and systems. So seeking that alignment and wider integration.
Okay. You've delivered so much for consideration by anybody out there who's got any kind of uncertainty, pointing the way to possibilities, and that's very important. Let's turn our attention to Gabrielle Gay and invite her in, because she's done a lot of mentoring and encouraging people in terms of basic literacy, but I'm sure she's got a lot more to share than that. So, Gabrielle, welcome. And I think that your mic is on, Gabrielle? Here we go. No? Not there? We see you, but we can't hear you. Let's try one more time to get Gabrielle in here to join us. And I'm sure we'll sort. She's sorting that out as we look at the situation. Yes. All right. So I want to though, because that is in future. I would say that she's more optimistic than we really did. Carmen, here.
No, I a lot of the view of Rochelle in terms of opportunity. I mean, let's think about it. We have at our fingers the possibility of having a global labor market where we, working from our house, for example, we can with everywhere, at the time, our own pace. Is very. We need to make sure that along all the things that you mentioned, which I share and I agree with, we also have a change in sort of mindsets and rules by companies and the state. So again, we go back to, there's a lot individually. I think all this resilience, capacity to learn and to have this sort of growth mindset in which we think that, we are a constant evolving, we are constantly evolving creatures that need to always, but also make all this even opportunity to have the right rules, right institutions that are brought to really compatible with this world. Now, we coexist social teams with regulations created at the beginning of the 20th century, and they were for a whole concept when all the ones that work inside work and hours, right, and had repetitive manual types of jobs. So fast forward 80 years later in service and all kinds of diverse work. We have many races. I mean, everyone is in the labor market. We have and we have to respect each other and embrace diversity. And we have we work maybe not even full-time anymore and not even in salary, and all these new forms of labor that relations that Rochelle was referring to where labor relations where the frontier between whether you are salaried, whether you are self-employed, whether you're in between is extremely unclear, right? And so the whole package of questions begins. So for example, if I am a freelancer and I'm working from home, does the minimum wage apply to me? Well, possibly no, because I'm a freelancer, but is this something that should be this way or no? And if I work part-time, how do I contribute to Social Security? Can I contribute to Social Security? And for what amount? And if I'm a freelancer, can I do it or maybe not? So right now, our Social Security, our labor regulations do not have answers to all of that because they were conceived in other times. So we need to bring, in order to make sure that we don't have to choose between, for example, flexibility and protection, in order to make sure that we can have it both ways, we need to adapt the rules. Because, for example, one thing has been clear with COVID is that all of those who didn't have access to the standard social protection schemes, unemployment insurance, and so on, they were extremely fragile. There's so much we can do. I mean, we can equip ourselves with skills, we can equip ourselves in many, many ways, but still, in contexts such like the ones we are facing right now, we are fragile. We need to make sure that our rules, our social protection system, our regulations cover us and protect us, and we don't have to choose between flexibly and adapted. And we have to up all the protection because they match with that style of work. So we have to make sure that we put those things together.
Okay. Now to our online and to battery. Vice President Gill at Cave the University. He's also in sports science. Welcome. Why are we not hearing to hear? Well, let's see if we can fix that in a couple of seconds here and have him join us and make a contribution from his side, particularly hearing from the Guild of Students. All right, let's try Gabrielle one more time. Gabrielle, can you go right ahead and make it quick?
Hi, good night. Can everyone hear me?
Yes, we are.
Oh, thank you. First of all, let me express my gratitude to the Central Bank of Barbados for having myself and other fantastic youth leaders on the call tonight and on the forum. So essentially, my role is with, I spearhead the Gabrielle Gay Award for Excellence in Reading and Literacy Mentorship Program, and we have promulgated and revolutionized education and literacy for the last 16 years. And I echo the sentiments of the panel that the COVID-19 pandemic in particular has been extremely to the nations that 94% students worldwide did education as a result of the pandemic. And these are things we also witness on a local level. As many in Barbados do not have access to that virtual technology that would then inculcate a smooth process and a smooth experience with regards to virtual learning. Now, something I want to jump into expeditiously is with regard to solutions. We've been talking about the uncertainty. We've been talking about the gloom and the doom, which by no means is unreal. Like it's very real. But
Gabrielle, unfortunately, because you didn't get in earlier, time is against us, and I want to suggest that the continued discussion about solutions takes place online because Anki is there and she more of your particular contribution, and that's certainly of Tahir Bulia, and continue the discussion after wrapped up the show. So, flies when you have fun, somebody said, but it's been to have this session, all of you this evening, and of course at the IADB in Washington, Rochelle UK, and Wayne Chen here with me in Jamaica. Thank you very much for joining us on this discussion. Let me suggest you continue the debate online. If you aren't there, continue on Facebook. And all the very best on our next edition of the Caribbean Economic Forum. I'm Julian Rogers in Kingston.